Well, good morning. Happy Sunday. Greetings to those joining us at Crossroads in Highland Park in Vernon Hills in the O1 or at home. And happy Pentecost Sunday. So this is the anniversary, the 2000 year birthday of the church, Acts 2. So have some cake. It's the day. It's June, so things are supposed to be settling down. That's not really been happening, best I can tell. So lots of good things going on, as you heard. We had last weekend was the 5th anniversary of the Vernon Hills campus. And so we started that, we launched that, you might remember, during COVID. Not what I would recommend if you're going to start a church, but we were all geared up and it sort of needed to happen, and so it did. And they have persevered. The book of Acts makes it clear starting a church is not an easy thing to do, but we did it, and by God's grace, they have persevered. And then we just had a bunch of things happening this week. Renew is going and growing, so by God's grace, we were given a warehouse in North Chicago. That's very significant. And we will build, we're on schedule to build 10 houses this year. So that's almost a house a month. And we'll have 1,700 volunteers, it looks like, working on those homes over the course of this year. If you've not worked on a Matthew home, want to encourage you to think about donating, volunteering some time. It's a great opportunity. And then Lake Light is going and ascending, and so we had our AI event this past Thursday night, which was interesting, and lots of other things happening there, fellows program, all kinds of stuff. And then, there's small groups and support groups in Cove and Lighthouse and Chig and St. James and global and local missions and all that stuff. So lots of things happening. It can be a little bit overwhelming. Perhaps you're showing up today a little bit overwhelmed. I'm not sure if it's because you feel like you're behind, or you're overwhelmed because you are in debt, or you are discouraged by your grades, or by your dead-end job, or by your lack of a job, or by the fact that AI is going to take your job, or you're discouraged by your marriage, or your lack of a marriage, or you're discouraged by your children, or the fact that you haven't been able to have children, or the fact that you're estranged from your children, or the fact that your children are taking every waking moment that you have. Perhaps you are discouraged because of broader national and geopolitical dysfunction and wars and divisions. There's all kinds of reasons that you might be anxious. I don't know if you're showing up anxious or overwhelmed. Perhaps you were not anxious or overwhelmed until I started reading all the things that should make you anxious or overwhelmed. But if you're showing up a little bit anxious, that's okay, because today is Psalm 130. And Psalm 130 is a psalm for those who are feeling overwhelmed. So, as you may know, the book of Psalms, so it's this collection, 150 chapters in the middle of the Old Testament, and they are, for the most part, they are prayers. God gives us the words to give back to God. That's the way this works. And we are invited to pray these prayers. He gives us the words to pray when we are sort of overwhelmed. So if you are frightened, there's a psalm for that. If you're struggling with doubt, there's a psalm for that. If you are really jealous of your neighbor or your brother or whoever who's got a lot more money than you do, there's a psalm for that. If you are really, really mad at somebody who betrayed you in some way, and you wish that they would drink poison and die, there is a psalm for that. Some of the words in the Psalms are scandalous, but God gives us His words to pray back to Him. And today we are looking at Psalm 130, which is a psalm for those who are overwhelmed. Now, twice in the last couple months, I have had good friends who have walked with Christ for a long time, who have suddenly been upended by life, and they have been reporting to me that the Psalms have been a lifeline to them, and that they are praying and meaning words that they could not pray if they weren't in the Psalms. Like they would not feel permission to articulate that level of emotional angst. So we're going to look at Psalm 130. It is a song for those that are overwhelmed in a particular way, and you'll see that. And I want to note, before we go there, you have options besides God's plan. I mean, praying a psalm like Psalm 130 is almost as if you are going to have God as your therapist, right? He is going to come alongside and counsel you through these words. You could go other directions if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're panicking, if you're anxious. You could just lean into your defense mechanism so you could get angry. You could blame other people. You could drink too much. I mean, there's lots of other things you can do when you are anxious, but this is the path that God has given us. So if you have a Bible and you want to turn with me to Psalm 130, while you are doing that, I will remind you that this psalm is one of the Psalms of Ascent. So there's 15 Psalms, 120 to 134, that are grouped together not because they are alike. So sometimes Psalms are grouped together because they're alike, or they fall into a category and we think, oh, that's a messianic psalm, or that's an imprecatory psalm, or that's a psalm of gratitude, or that's a psalm of lament, or that's what. The Psalms of Ascent are sort of across the spectrum in terms of the kinds of psalms they are. This is a little bit of a penitential psalm, a little bit of a song of hope. But these 15 are grouped together because they were the songs that the Jews were invited to sing when they were ascending. And there's physically they were climbing up to Jerusalem for one of the big festivals, and this was the playlist as they were climbing. Of course, there's a little bit of a metaphor working here. They are ascending physically, but they're also ascending spiritually. They're marching towards God. And this is a short psalm, only 8 verses. It's a very famous psalm. So Augustine, one of the great theologians, perhaps the premier theologian of the first 1,000 years in the church, this was Augustine's favorite psalm. This was Calvin, John Calvin, the great reformer, his favorite psalm. This was a favorite psalm of Wesley. Luther wrote a hymn about this psalm. John Owen, a Puritan, wrote a 350-page book on these 8 verses. So it's a fairly famous psalm, and it is a psalm directed at those who are overwhelmed, in particular by their own guilt and shame. So I invite you to follow with me Psalm 130, verse 1. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. So cries from the depths immediately bring us into this idea that somebody is in trouble. They are panicking. Out of the depths, I am in despair. I am in crisis. I am crying out to you, Lord. Hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, who could stand? So, if you've fallen into a hole, and that's a little bit of the metaphor here, you've fallen into, you've fallen into some hole and you need help and you're crying out for help. If it's a literal hole, you've fallen into a well, then you're crying out for a rope, right? You're crying out for somebody to get you out of this hole. That's not what the psalmist is crying for here. He cries for mercy. And then it goes on, and this is the next clue that this is all about his guilt. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Hebrew here, if you watched sin, the Hebrew language is often a little bit more anthropomorphic. It sort of puts things into a personalized context. If you, Lord, watched sin, if you kept a record of sins, who could stand? So let me just note, as I said, lots of people have written on this psalm. It's a favorite psalm, lots of songs, lots of ink, lots of attention to this psalm. And reading and preparing to preach on this, I read a bunch of this, and two writers really got my attention. One of them is Eugene Peterson. And Eugene Peterson passed away a couple years ago. He was a pastor and a writer, and he translated the Message, if you've ever read the Message paraphrase of the Bible. And I met him a few times. He was a very gentle, very soft-spoken man. And he wrote a book on the Psalms of Ascent, and it's called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And he wrote it in the 80s, and I always thought A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. That sounds very much like Eugene Peterson. What an interesting quote that he gave. I learned a few years ago, no, that's actually a quote from Nietzsche, who is about the most anti-Eugene Peterson guy you can come up with. Nietzsche is the God is dead philosopher, sort of all that matters is power, get power, be strong, squish everybody else. So it was a little shocking to me to realize, oh, that's Eugene Peterson quoting Nietzsche, but that's what happened. And in his chapter on Psalm 130, he says the normal things. He talks about the fact that suffering is sort of a normal part of life, and we should not be surprised by suffering, and we should not be embarrassed by suffering. We should not try to hide our suffering. We don't have to advertise it, but there's got to be a community in which we're sharing the struggles that we're having. He talks about all that. But then what really got my attention is he then talks about how to pray a psalm like this. And he makes this distinction. He says, look, when it comes to feelings, when it comes to our emotions, there's two approaches today. So you've got what we'll call as sort of the religious approach to dealing with emotions, and you've got a more modern, secular approach to dealing with emotions. So the religious approach to dealing with emotions is that you're sort of scandalized by them, and so you've got to suppress them. Now, let me just step back here and say, when I'm talking about religious approach, I want to acknowledge that there's different definitions of religion, and by some definitions of religion, Christianity is a religion. Okay, Martin Marty, the University of Chicago, he edited this like 12 volumes on religion. And I heard him give a lecture, and he was asked, Dr. Marty, what's your definition of religion? And he said, my definition of religion is anything I write about in these 12 volumes. And then he went on to say, he goes, I actually have like 64 different definitions of religion. Religion means a lot of things to a lot of different people. I want to stress that when we're talking about the Christian faith, if your understanding of religion is one of those definitions that says religion is what we do to earn God's favor, okay, then Christianity is not a religion, right? Because Christianity says we're too broken, too fallen, too sinful to earn God's favor. We cannot lift ourselves up and be good enough. We depend upon God reaching down. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, right? So God is reaching down, it's not that we're reaching up. Now, to be clear, we're expected to try and be better. Jesus' message was not try harder, be better, but that comes on the other side of salvation. So we're expected, you're expected to be kinder, to be more generous. You're expected to go out of your way to care for the poor. You are expected to put the needs of others ahead of your own. We are expected to do these things, but we're not doing them in hopes that we will earn God's favor. We cannot, we've fallen too far into the hole to save ourselves, right? We're gonna need help, which we'll see in this psalm. So Christianity is not this I do, it's not this me, it's not me reaching up that I somehow now merit God's love. We are saved by grace through faith. It is not of ourselves, it's a gift of God, not as a result of works. We don't get to boast about this. This is not, look at me, I am really impressive. Like if that's your approach, you got real problems. Christianity is not a religion in that classic sense. So I want to acknowledge that, but then I also want to say there's a lot of people, and I believe there are a lot of Christ followers who get confused and who are adopting a religious approach to emotions. And the religious approach to emotions says, my emotions are a little scandalous, and so I need to keep them down. Like the kinds of things that I want or think about or whatever. I mean, I am greedy. I can be full of lust or anger or pride, and I gotta push that stuff down. I gotta hold the beach ball under the water. I can't do. These are bad, and I can't really acknowledge that I'm bad because I'm trying to earn, and I don't want God to see this stuff, and so I am going to do everything I can to just keep my emotions at arm's length. Okay, so I get this because the church that we went to some when I was growing up was very religious. I mean, I heard a lot about rules. I'm a junior high boy. The rules were often, be better than you are, don't run. There's just a lot of rules that we were constantly breaking and getting in trouble. And so to me, God is always disappointed in me because I'm not being good enough. And then in addition to that, my dad's approach to raising us, and especially I think to raising me, was the oldest of 5 kids, the boy, the oldest boy, and so the message was, you have got to succeed. You cannot fail, and you cannot feel if feelings are going to get in the way. You cannot have fear. You're going to have to go do it. The world is cruel. You're going to get knocked down. Nobody cares. You got to figure out how to get up and be strong and make this work. Now, my dad, and I've talked about my dad at great length, and my dad, I think, had a great fourth quarter of life. At about 60, I think, came to faith, becomes a much more gracious, kind man. His life, growing up especially, was very, very hard. They were very poor. He thinks that at an early age, 10 or 12, that he was making more money delivering papers than his dad was, and he was giving all the money to his family, and everybody was always depending upon him, and he felt like there's no safety net. I got to make this work. I got to make this work. I got to keep this together. And he was supporting then his parents later on, and there's just, he had a difficult life, and he's like, look, what do I got to teach my kids? I got to teach them that life is cruel. And you better figure out how to succeed. Okay, so it took a while for me, took some counseling for me to figure out that he wasn't cruel, right? He loved me. He was trying to prepare me for a cruel world. But I got the message: don't fear, don't feel, don't fail. Like those are the marching orders. He didn't say it, but those were the marching orders. So there's a lot of people that are going to keep their emotions at arm's length. There's another approach at the complete opposite end of the spectrum right now. In this postmodern moment, or postmodern, whatever is going on in the culture at this moment, however you want to understand that. Today what we get told is, no, your emotions are the truest thing about you. Like what you feel is who you are. We all have our own lived experience. We all are entitled to our own truth. You do you. And nobody can tell you that there is any right or wrong or any standards. Your feelings are the most significant thing about you. Okay, so we have 2 very different approaches going on right now. Deny your feelings, they're bad, keep them at arm's length, don't look at them, and completely idolize them. Okay, so what Peterson talks about is, he says, no, look, there's a third way. And the third way is to pray your emotions. Not to pray for them, right? But to pray them, to read the Psalms. And to take the words that God gives us for the feelings that we're having. Again, is it doubt? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it lust? Is it confession? Is it revenge? What are you feeling? Pray your feelings and bring them before God, and let God be the therapist that is going to march you through. So I really appreciated that about Peterson. And then the other author that was helpful to me in this psalm was Tim Keller. And Keller, he says some of the same things that, Augustine and Calvin and Luther and all these guys write about. But then he goes into some length to talk about the difference between guilt and shame. So he notes that we're living in a moment where some people coming out of more traditional environments, again, sort of the religious environment. In a traditional environment, lots of people know what the rules are, and they're aware that they break the rules, and they feel guilt. Okay, I'm not supposed to do this, but I did it. I am supposed to do this, I didn't do it. I feel guilty about a very specific thing. Okay, so there's a lot of guilt out there, but we now have, again, this much more fluid, again, cultural soup that we're swimming in right now that says there are no rules, right? You make up your own rules. Whatever rules you want to be true, those are true for you. Everybody's entitled to their own rules. Don't let anybody power up on you and say that this is the meta-narrative, right? No. We all get to do what we all want to do, provided you don't hurt somebody else or whatever the rules are, whatever few rules there are. Basically, we get to make this up. So Keller notes that in this environment, what we have are people not only not feeling guilty, and again, the people over here, if they break the rules, they feel guilty and they try and hide it. They don't want people to know they cheated on their taxes, right? They don't want anybody to know this. Over here, what you get are people going on YouTube to brag about the fact of what they're doing, to sort of scandalize everybody by saying, no, this is what I do, right? I'm posting it online. I want everybody to know because I am flying in the face of anything ostensibly a traditional rule. But then, and I thought this was brilliant, Keller goes on to note, while we have a lot of people feeling guilt, this group doesn't feel guilt. They tend not to feel guilt. Because you can harden your heart enough. Like you can convince yourself there are no rules, I can do what I want. I'm entitled to my truth. And you can harden your heart and not feel guilt. But shame doesn't go away. And guilt and shame are different things. So guilt, the opposite of guilt is innocence. The opposite of shame is glory. And what happens is people end up feeling shame. Now, let me just note, guilt has got its, we could spend a lot of time talking about guilt because guilt is complicated and some people feel guilty when they shouldn't and they don't feel guilty when they should, and there's a whole lot there that, we could read some Freud, we could go all into this, I'll simply say guilt tends to be about very specific things because we know what the rules are, we think we know what the rules are, and if we're violating the rules, we feel guilty for a specific thing. Shame is sort of general, and it's more of a, it's not that I've done something wrong, it's that there's something wrong with me, or I'm wrong. So there's a lot of people who write about shame. If you go back a little ways, you get this Czech Jewish philosopher Kafka, who writes these very, very dark novels. Disney is never going to bring Kafka to an animated feature. One of the most famous Kafka stories has got this guy that gets arrested, but he doesn't know what for. And he keeps asking, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? He gets arrested, and then he gets taken to the police station, and he gets charged. He's like, what am I being charged with? And nobody will tell him. And he goes to prison. And he's in prison for a while, and then he's got his trial, and he's found guilty in his trial, but he's like, what am I guilty of? What have I done? No one will tell him his crime. And then he's back in jail, and then he goes to his death, and he never finds out what he's guilty of. And it's very frustrating and very dark, and Kafka writes about this And he says, if I can find it, here it is. Kafka writes about this, and he says that we feel guilty even though we don't believe in sin. But people who do not believe that they've done anything wrong feel as though there is something wrong with them. So, as I've said, there's a lot they're writing about shame. More recently, you had John Bradshaw wrote a book, Healing the Shame That Binds Us, and then Brene Brown has sort of made a big splash on TED Talks and books and other things, writing about shame and writing about vulnerability, and lots of people are going, yeah, I've got this problem, and I feel like there's something wrong with me. And I don't feel guilty because it's not like I think I should be doing different things because I don't believe in those things, but I do have this sense that there is something about me that is shameful. So I want to note those things set up our reflection here on Psalm 130. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, who could stand? Now let's just note, the psalmist, and we don't know who wrote this psalm, but the psalmist is acknowledging that there is such a thing as sin. There are standards. So in this moment, there's a lot of people telling us there are no standards. We get to do whatever we want. Okay, to be clear, there's problems with the traditional religious ideology, but to be clear, there are standards, right? There is right and wrong. There's ultimate reality. It's grounded in the character of God. And Paul will write in 1 Corinthians 4, he says, I care very little if I'm judged by you or by a human court. Indeed, I don't even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't make me innocent. It's the Lord who judges me. Right, so Paul says, look, I don't care what you think of me. I don't actually even care that much what I think of myself, because the question is, what does God think of me? There's only two eyes that I've got to really be concerned about. He is my ultimate judge. What does God think about me? And then he acknowledges that there is sin. And he says, if you kept a record of my sin, I would be in trouble. Now, he says he doesn't keep a record. That's sort of a metaphor. Of course, we know from, Daniel 9, and we know from a number of places that our all-knowing God knows everything. But saying he doesn't keep a record is he's not going to hold this against us if we are in Christ. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, who could stand? But with you, there is forgiveness. By the way, I love the line, who could stand? In Psalm 1, it says, the wicked cannot stand in judgment. The wicked cannot stand in judgment. And that's because we were crushed under the weight of our guilt, right? We would collapse. And so I love that sort of image there. But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can, with reverence, the ESV translates that with fear. I think that's probably a little closer, but so that we can, with fear, serve you. I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word, in his promises, I put my hope. Now, let me remind you, there's a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is tied to, easiest way to think about it, it's tied to optics. It's tied to what you can see. It's tied to trends. It's tied to data. What do the facts on the ground suggest is going to happen? Do you think it's trending in a good direction? Then you can be optimistic. If you think it's trending in a bad direction, you would be pessimistic. Hope is very different. Hope doesn't look at either of those things. Hope is saying, my hope is in Christ. My hope is in God. My hope is in the promises of God. So I know what his promises are, and I can rest in his promises. Even if the trend lines are bad, okay, I don't have to worry about that. So if you were here for the AI event, On Thursday, we had sort of 4 experts, and they were talking about what AI is and the upside, potential upside of AI, the potential downside of AI, and that kind of thing. I had a 30-second assignment in the evening, and that was to come up at the very end and to say, I just want to remind you, because we were worried that this would go particularly dark. You bring in the experts, you don't know what they're going to say, and there's this concern that it could go really dark. There was an article in the New York Times that I put in my Friday update a couple weeks ago, and this guy that left OpenAI, that started ChatGPT and working with Sam Altman. So he comes out, like a number of these engineers leave OpenAI 3 weeks ago, and they publish a forecast. And their forecast says, yeah, we've sort of been lying about some of this stuff. It's further along than we've said, and it's a little bit out of control, and we think the world is going to end, that AI is going to bring everything to an end in 2027. You go, oh, okay, wow, that's interesting. So in 2 years, you think the world is going to end. And they said, we could be wrong about that by a year. We could be off by a year. So it could be 2028. And so, look, people have been predicting the end of the world for 2,000 years. I don't understand. People ask me, are you worried about this? I go, well, look, I don't understand this, to be clear. I don't know whether there's, that's not my field. I have hope in God, right? There's a Tower of Babel-ish kind of nature to AI that leads me to think God might smack it down in some way. I don't know. But I have confidence in God. This ends well in Christ. So we put our hope in the Lord. I wait for the Lord. More than watchmen wait for the morning, more than watchmen wait for the morning. So the repetition is one of the ways that in Hebrew and Greek writing, you emphasize something. And so I'm waiting, I'm trusting, I'm hoping in the Lord, and I'm sort of anxious that he will show up so that my anxiety will go away. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. So it's interesting, because so what's the solution? He goes, the solution is Jesus. Now, of course, this is an Old Testament text, right? And Jesus just doesn't come onto the scene until the Old Testament is safely tucked away for 400 years. But it is foreshadowing Jesus. So I put my hope in the Lord. The Lord it's in him that I'm going to get my full redemption. He's my rescuer. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. He's talking ahead about Jesus. He's foreshadowing what Jesus is going to do on the cross. So Luther, I mentioned, this was one of his favorite psalms, and he wrote a hymn about it. When he was asked what psalms he liked most, Luther said, I like the Pauline ones. Okay, now, Paul doesn't write any psalms. So to say I like the Pauline ones is sort of like, okay, what is he saying? Well, he's saying, I like psalms like this that look ahead and declare the work of Jesus. We are saved by grace through faith. I'm going to be rescued. Right? I'm not going to save myself. I'm not going to be able to crawl out of this pit on my own power. I am going to be rescued by the rescuer who will secure for me my redemption. So I am going to pray Psalm 130 as the prayer for the end of this sermon, and I'll just say, like, we are not praying for our emotions, we are embodying, praying our emotions. And we recognize there's a difference between guilt and shame. Maybe we got traditional problems, maybe we got postmodern problems. I don't really know where you land, but the solution is neither of those. It's a third way, and this is a third way that relies on Jesus. And so I invite you to join with me in praying Psalm 130, a song of ascent. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence serve you. I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord more than the watchmen wait for the morning, more than the watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord. For with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. Amen.
Amen. Can we all please stand as we sing our final song together?